Have you ever heard a sound in your house late at night and tried to convince yourself it was just the wind? That's what one family in Adams, Tennessee, told themselves. They lived in an old farmhouse, the kind with creaky floors and secrets whispered in the walls. Every night, at exactly midnight, the knocking would start. 3 simple taps on the wooden walls. At first, it was easy to dismiss. An old house settling, a branch tapping against a siding, or just the wind playing tricks on them. But this was different. The knocking was rhythmic, deliberate. It had a strange kind of intelligence to it. The family consisted of a father, a mother, and their 2 young children. They'd moved into the house for a fresh start, a quiet life in the country. But the knocking was anything but quiet. It shattered the peace of their nights. The father, a practical man, checked everything. He secured the windows, trimmed the trees back from the house, and even went into the crawl space looking for loose pipes. But still, every night, on the dot, the 3 knocks would return, always from a different wall, as if something was moving around them, circling the house from the inside. The mother was the first to feel a real sense of dread. She noticed things the others missed. A cold spot that would suddenly appear in a room. The scent of damp earth when all the windows were closed. The way their dog would whine and cower just moments before the knocking began. She started sleeping with the lights on, but the darkness seemed to seep in from the corners of the room anyway. The children began having nightmares. They spoke of a tapping man who walked through the walls. Their drawings, once filled with sunny skies and smiling stick figures, were now dark scribbles of a house with no doors and shadowed figures looming outside. One night, the father, fed up and determined to confront whatever was tormenting his family, decided he'd had enough. He sat in the living room, a heavy flashlight in his hand, his knuckles white. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked closer to midnight. The house was unnervingly silent. Then, right on cue, it started. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it came from the wall right behind him. He jumped to his feet. "Who's there?" he yelled into the darkness, his voice echoing in the still house. The response came immediately. 3 more knocks. A clear, definitive answer. A cold shiver traced its way down his spine. This wasn't the wind. This was a conversation. Taking a deep breath, he tried again, his mind racing through logical explanations. A prankster. A neighbor, but the knocks were coming from inside the walls. Is it a person? A cadet, out his voice trembling slightly. This time, the answer was different. 2 knocks, a clear no. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. He could feel the fine hairs on his arms standing on end. His wife was now standing in the doorway, her face pale, clutching a crucifix to her chest. She had heard it too. The intelligent, terrifying response from the walls of their home. The father's frustration turned to fear. A primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He had to know more. He had to understand. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. For a long moment, there was only silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was worse than the knocking itself. The clock ticked, each second stretching into an eternity. He thought, for a moment, that it was over, that he had scared it away. And then, a sound drifted down the hallway, a sound that froze the blood in their veins. It wasn't a knock, it was a whisper. A dry, raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And it spoke his name, Ease. Full name, Jonathan Michael Smith. It whispered the middle name that no one used, the name only his mother, who had passed away years ago, ever called him. The intimate detail, the violation of that private piece of his identity, was the most terrifying thing of all. This entity didn't just know they were there. It knew who he was. It knew him. The flashlight slipped from his trembling hand and clattered to the floor, plunging the room into near darkness. He and his wife stood frozen, staring down the dark hallway from where the whisper had come, their hearts pounding in their chests. There were no more questions to ask. They knew they were not alone, and they knew that whatever was with them was ancient, knowledgeable, and malevolent. The rest of the night was an agonizing wait for dawn. They huddled together in the living room, not daring to move, listening to the house settle around them in a now sinister silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like a prelude to something worse. But the knocking didn't return. The whisper didn't come again. When the first gray light of morning finally filtered through the windows, it felt like a rescue. The father, exhausted but desperate, cautiously moved through the house. And what he found was deeply unsettling. Every single door in the house was wide open. The front door, the back door, the closet doors, even the small cabinet doors in the kitchen. They were all swung open as if inviting something in or letting something out. They didn't need any more signs. They packed what they could fit into their car, leaving everything else behind. They didn't look back as they sped away from the old farmhouse in Adams, Tennessee. The house stood silent, watching them go, its doors still agape. The family never spoke of that night in detail again. It was a wound too deep to reopen. But the father would sometimes wake in a cold sweat, the memory of that dry whisper echoing in his mind, speaking the name only his mother used to call him. The knocking in the walls had stopped. It had gotten what it wanted. It had learned their names, and sometimes knowing is enough. The story serves as a chilling reminder that some old houses are better left alone, and some questions are better left unasked. Because you might not like the answer you get when the walls themselves decide to talk back. Thanks for watching. If you have a story about a place with a dark history or a chilling local legend, share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this dive into the unexplained, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Stay curious and stay safe. The old Bell homestead had stood for over 200 years, a silent monument to one of America's most infamous hauntings. Its reputation was a magnet for ghost hunters, thrill seekers, and skeptics alike. Lucy considered herself a healthy mix of all three. When her friends dared her to spend a weekend there alone, she jumped at the chance. She'd always been fascinated by the legend of the Bell Witch, the malevolent spirit said to torment the Bell family in the early 1800s. The stories were terrifying, of course, but they were just that, stories. Or so she thought. The first night was uneventful. Lucy explored the creaking house with a flashlight and a digital recorder, documenting every cold spot and strange noise. She found nothing more than drafty windows and the groan of old wood settling. Feeling a little disappointed, she decided to up the ante. For her second and final night, she would sleep in the guest room. This was the very room where the spirit was said to linger most, the epicenter of the paranormal activity. Locals called it the witch's room. The air in there was different, heavy and still, but Lucy chalked it up to poor ventilation and the power of suggestion. She set up a small camera on the dresser, aimed at the bed, just in case. Exhausted from her amateur ghost hunt, she slipped under the covers and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sometime in the dead of night, she woke up. It wasn't a sudden jolt, but a slow, creeping awareness. The first thing she noticed was the sound, a soft, rhythmic breathing, in and out, in and out. It was slow and shallow, like someone sleeping peacefully right beside her ear. But she was alone. Her own breath hitched in her throat, a stark contrast to the steady sound filling the room. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. She squeezed her eyes shut, telling herself it was just the wind, or the house, or her own imagination running wild in this creepy old place. But the sound was too distinct, too organic. It was the sound of life, where there should have been none. Slowly, carefully, she opened her eyes. The room was shrouded in near-total darkness, the moonlight barely filtering through the grimy windowpane. Her gaze darted around, trying to pierce the shadows. Then she saw it. Or rather, she felt it. Present. It was coming from the darkest corner of the room, a patch of blackness that seemed to swallow the light. It was a void, a deep, impenetrable shadow where the walls should have met. And from that void, a voice spoke. It was a whisper, soft and raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The words slithered through the air and coiled in her ear. "You took my place." Ice-cold terror seized her. Lucy tried to scream, to sit up, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She was paralyzed, pinned to the mattress, as if by an immense, invisible weight. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. It felt like the very atmosphere of the room had turned against her, holding her captive. Panic flared, hot and sharp, but it was useless. She was a prisoner in her own body. The voice began again. No longer just a whisper, but a soft, conversational tone that was somehow even more terrifying. It started listing things, details from Lucy's life. It spoke of the small, white house she grew up in on Elm Street, the one with the crooked porch swing. It mentioned the recurring nightmare she had as a child about a man with no face. It whispered the name of her first love, a secret she had never told a single soul. With each revelation, the voice grew more confident, more intimate. It knew her deepest fears, her most private thoughts, her most shameful secrets. It was as if this entity had peeled back her skull and was reading the pages of her life, one by one. How could it know these things? The question screamed in her mind, a frantic, silent plea. The voice chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to come from all around her. It described the silver locket her grandmother had given her, the one she'd lost in the lake when she was 16. It detailed the argument she'd had with her mother just last week, word for painful word. It was a violation, an intrusion so profound it felt like her very soul was being laid bare and dissected by this unseen thing in the corner. The litany of her life went on, a relentless monologue of her past. Lucy lost all track of time. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into what felt like an eternity. The voice was her entire world, the darkness, her universe. Her terror eventually gave way to a strange, chilling sense of resignation. She stopped fighting. She simply lay there, listening, as the story of her life was told back to her by a phantom. The voice never faltered, never hesitated. It knew her better than she knew herself. The last thing she remembered was the voice whispering, "Now you see. This room needed a story, and you have such a good one." Then, a profound and absolute silence fell. The heavy pressure on her chest lifted. The suffocating stillness of the air dissipated. And then, nothing. When the first rays of morning sun pierced through the dusty window, they fell upon an empty bed. The sheets were still rumpled from where Lucy had slept. The camera she had set up was still on the dresser, its little red light blinking patiently. But Lucy was not in the bed. She was standing in the corner of the room, the very corner from which the voice had spoken. Her body was rigid, her face turned to the wall, just inches from the peeling wallpaper. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. She had no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of walking across the cold, wooden floor. She only knew a deep, gnawing emptiness, a sense that something vital had been scoured from her. She did not know how long she stood there before the full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. She stumbled away from the wall, her legs weak and trembling. She snatched her camera, grabbed her bag, and fled the house without a second glance. She didn't stop running until the old Bell homestead was just a speck in her rearview mirror. Later, when she was miles away and her hands had finally stopped shaking enough to operate the camera, she watched the footage from the night before. She saw herself sleeping peacefully. She saw herself wake up, her eyes wide with terror. But there was no sound on the recording, no breathing, no whispering. The only audio was the faint hum of the camera and, once, a soft creak from the floorboards. But the most chilling part came towards the end of the recording. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the room, her sleeping form on the bed flickered, like a bad television signal. For a split second, she vanished entirely, leaving only an impression on the sheets. Then, just as suddenly, the image stabilized, but she was no longer in the bed. The camera's view didn't show the corner. Lucy never told anyone the full story of what happened in that room. How could she explain it? How could she describe the feeling of being known so completely by something that wasn't human? She'd gone to the Bell homestead looking for a ghost story, a thrill to share with her friends. But the house hadn't given her a story. It had taken hers. And sometimes in the dead of night, when she wakes up from a dream she can't remember, she can almost hear a faint, raspy whisper from the darkest corner of her room, and she feels an overwhelming urge to go and stand there facing the wall. Thanks for watching. If stories like this leave you checking your own corners at night, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tailies from the shadows. Stay safe out there. Have you ever heard a song that gets stuck in your head? You know, the kind that just loops over and over. But what if that song wasn't just in your head? What if it followed you? A ghostly echo you couldn't escape. That's what a group of hikers discovered in the woods of Tennessee, near a place with a dark and legendary history. The story of the Bell, which is one of America's most famous hauntings. For years, the Bell family claimed they were tormented by an unseen entity. This spirit, known as Kate, was said to be mischievous, cruel, and incredibly powerful. But there was one peculiar detail the family often mentioned. Kate loved songs. She would sometimes join in when they sang hymns. Her voice beautiful but unsettling, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a strange, almost gentle quirk for such a malevolent spirit. Decades, even centuries, passed. The direct memory of the Bell family's torment faded into local legend, a ghost story told around campfires. The small cabin was long gone, reclaimed by the relentless Tennessee wilderness. The land itself, however, seemed to hold on to the memory, whispering it through the rustling leaves and the sighing wind. People still spoke of strange occurrences on the old Bell property, odd lights, disembodied voices, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. But for the most part, it was just a place for locals to hike, a historical curiosity shrouded in folklore. One crisp autumn afternoon, years after the last direct accounts of the Bell which had been recorded, a group of 4 friends decided to explore the trails near the former Bell farm. They were experienced hikers, familiar with the area, but they had never ventured this deep into the woods, so close to the heart of the legend. The air was cool, the sunlight filtering through the canopy of red and gold leaves. It was a perfect day, peaceful and serene. They laughed and talked, their voices carrying through the quiet forest, completely unaware that they were about to step into an echo of the past. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor, a faint sound reached their ears. It was distant at first, almost mistaken for the wind. But as they walked on, the sound grew clearer. It was music. Specifically, it was a voice singing a slow, gentle hymn. The melody was simple, mournful, and strangely beautiful. It seemed to drift through the trees from somewhere up ahead, a solitary voice in the vast wilderness. Their conversation died down as they all strained to listen. The voice was female, clear as a bell, yet it had an ethereal quality, like a recording played from far away. It was calming, but there was an undercurrent of deep sadness to it that sent a shiver down their spines. Curiosity, as it often does, got the better of them. Who would be singing out here, all alone? A fellow hiker, a local practicing their faith in the solitude of nature. They decided to investigate. They left the marked trail, pushing through underbrush and stepping over fallen logs, following the source of the haunting melody. The singing never wavered. It remained constant in volume and tempo, a steady beacon guiding them deeper into the woods. With every step, the feeling of unease grew. The forest seemed to get darker, the air colder. The natural sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of squirrels had vanished completely. All that remained was the silence and the song. Finally, they broke through a thicket of trees and found themselves in a small, circular clearing. The ground was covered in a carpet of dead leaves, and in the center stood the crumbling remains of a stone foundation, all that was left of a long-forgotten structure. The old Bell cabin. The moment they stepped into the clearing, the singing stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was more jarring than the music had been. It pressed in on them, heavy and suffocating. They stood frozen, looking around the empty space. There was no one there. No footprints in the leaves, other than their own. They scanned the tree line, expecting to see someone watching them, but there was nothing. Just the dense, silent woods. One of them nervously joked, "All right, who's a shower singer?" But the joke fell flat, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. They were all thinking the same thing. This was the place from the stories. After a few tense moments, they decided to leave. The sun was setting, and the woods were no place to be after dark, especially not these woods. They turned to go, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. And that's when it started again. The hymn. But this time, it was different. It wasn't coming from up ahead. It wasn't coming from the clearing. It was coming from right behind them. Each of them heard it at the same time. The same sad, beautiful voice, singing the same mournful tune. But it was as if the singer was standing directly over their shoulder, her voice whispering into their ear. They spun around, all 4 of them, but there was nothing there. just empty space. Then, the voice was on their left, then their right. It was everywhere at once, a disembodied sound that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. Panic set in. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't natural. They didn't need to say a word to each other. They, igust, ran. They crashed through the woods, branches whipping at their faces, their lungs burning. They fled back the way they came, desperate to reach the safety of the marked trail in their car. But the song followed them. No matter how fast they ran, the hymn stayed with them, always seeming to be just a few feet away. It never got louder, never got softer. It was a constant, terrifying companion. Its gentle melody, a stark contrast to the terror that fueled their flight. They could hear it over their own ragged breaths and the frantic pounding of their feet. The serene tune had transformed into something monstrous, a relentless pursuit by an unseen force. The woods, which had seemed so peaceful just an hour before, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap them. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow seemed to hide a figure. The only constant was the song, a ghostly anchor in a sea of fear. Finally, gasping for air, they burst out of the woods and back onto the main road, the last rays of sunlight fading from the sky. They scrambled into their car, fumbling with the keys, and sped Hawaii, not daring to look back. As the car tore down the gravel road, they rolled up the windows, but it didn't help. The hymn was still there, a faint but clear melody inside the car with them. It was only when they were miles away, when the lights of their town came into view, that the song finally, mercifully, faded into silence. They never spoke of what happened in detail again, not even to each other. The experience was too personal, too terrifying. But the legend of the singing woods grew. Other visitors to the area have since reported hearing it. Alone, sat him echoing through the trees near the old Bell property. Some say it's the ghost of the Bell Witch, Kate, still singing the songs she loved in life. Others believe it's an echo of the past, the sorrow of the Bell family imprinted on the land itself. The scariest part isn't just the song, but its nature. It doesn't seem to want to harm you. It just wants to be heard. It follows you, not with malice, but with a persistent, inescapable sorrow. It's a hymn that won't end. And they say that even now, on quiet nights, if you were to stand at the edge of those woods, you might just hear it. A beautiful, mournful tune drifting on the wind. A song that is still being sung, even when there's no one left to listen. Thank you for watching. If you have any stories of strange sounds or unexplained events, share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into the unknown. Stay curious and stay safe. Have you ever heard a story that just sticks with you? One that crawls under your skin and makes you question the quiet creaks of your own house at night. Today, we're diving back into one of America's most infamous hauntings. But we're not talking about the part you already know. We're talking about the promise. A promise made by the Bell, which before she vanished, a promise to return. For most, this was just the closing chapter of a terrifying legend. For one family, it was a beginning. Let's set the scene. The year is 1821. The relentless torment of the Bell family in Adams, Tennessee, finally ceases. The entity, known as the Bell Witch, which had plagued them for years with physical attacks, disembodied voices, and terrifying apparitions, declared it was leaving. But not forever. Before disappearing, the spirit made two distinct promises. First, it would return in 7 years, which it reportedly did, for a brief and less violent visit with John Bell Jr. in 1828. But it was the second promise that hung in the air like a storm cloud, a vow to return in 107 years. That would put the year at 1935. A lot can change in over a century. Memories fade, stories become folklore, and the sharp edges of fear get worn down into campfire tales. The land where the Bell farm once stood passed through different hands, the soil holding its secrets tight. For decades, things were quiet. The witch was gone, a relic of a bygone era, or so everyone thought. Now, fast forward. It's the mid-20th century. The world is a different place. The Great Depression is loosening its grip, and the whispers of another world war are on the horizon. A new family whose names have been lost to time, or perhaps intentionally obscured for their own peace of mind, decides to build a new life. They buy a piece of property in Robertson County, land that was once part of the original Bell Farm. They're hopeful, looking to put down roots, unaware of the history buried beneath their feet. They build a modest home, pour their sweat and savings into it, and dream of a peaceful future. For a little while, that's exactly what they got. The children played in the fields, the seasons turned, and life was beautifully, wonderfully normal. The old stories were just that, stories. But land has a memory, and some promises are meant to be kept. The first sign was subtle. So subtle, they probably dismissed it as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. It started with the windows. One morning, the mother was wiping down the glass when she noticed something odd. Etched into the thin layer of dust and condensation were two words, written in a delicate, almost spidery script. I waited. She blinked, wiped it away, and told herself it must have been one of the kids. But when she asked them, they denied it, their eyes wide with genuine confusion. It was unsettling, sure, but easy enough to explain away. Children forget. It was just a weird little prank. The next day, however, the same two words were back, on a different window, clearer this time. I waited. A chill snaked down her spine. This wasn't a child's game. This felt like a message. Soon, the strange messages on the windows were the least of their worries. Things began to move. A hairbrush left on a dresser would be found on the kitchen table. A book carefully placed on a nightstand would be discovered lying open on the floor, flipped to a random page. At first, it was minor annoyances. Misplaced keys, a missing sock. They accused each other of being forgetful, of being careless. The tension in the house began to grow, a quiet, simmering frustration. But the activity escalated. It was no longer just small objects. One evening, the family sat down for dinner, and as the father reached for the salt shaker, it slid across the table, stopping just short of his hand, as if moved by an invisible force. Silence fell over the room. There was no explanation, no tilted table, no hidden string, just an impossible movement that everyone witnessed. The children looked at their parents, their faces pale. The beautiful, normal life they had built was starting to crack. The phenomena became more direct, more personal. It was no longer just objects. It was the environment itself. Candles they'd light for ambience would extinguish themselves with a sudden puff of air, even in a room with all the windows and doors sealed shut. The air would grow inexplicably cold in one specific corner of the living room, a cold that felt like it seeped right into your bones. And then came the sounds. It started as a whisper, so faint you'd think it was the wind rustling through the leaves. But the whispers grew into distinct noises. The soft, lilting sound of a woman humming a tune no one recognized would drift from an empty hallway. The family would be huddled in the living room, and from an upstairs bedroom, they'd hear the floorboards creak, one slow step at a time, as if someone were pacing back and forth. But the most unnerving sound of all was the laughter. It was a high, tinkling laugh, but it held no joy. It echoed from empty rooms, bounced off the walls when the house was silent, a ghostly mirth that made the hair on their arms stand up. They searched the house from top to bottom, finding nothing, no one. The laughter wasn't coming from outside. It was inside with them. The family was living in a state of constant, low-grade fear. Sleep offered little escape. They'd be jolted awake by a loud bang from the kitchen or the sound of their names being whispered from the darkness. The children started having nightmares. They refused to sleep alone, huddling together in their parents' room. The house, which was supposed to be their sanctuary, had become their prison. They felt watched, constantly. The feeling of an unseen presence was suffocating. They stopped having guests over, embarrassed and terrified of what might happen. Their world shrank to the four walls of that house, and even there, they were not alone. They were sharing their home with something that was growing bolder, more confident with each passing day. It was no longer just moving things or making noise. It was trying to communicate. It was making its presence known in the most terrifying way possible. The breaking point came on a cold, moonless night. The house was quiet, but it was a heavy, expectant. Salenza, the youngest child, a little girl, no older than 6, was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, playing with her dolls. The rest of the family was downstairs, trying to pretend everything was normal. Suddenly, the little girl looked up from her toys, and stared into the darkest corner of a room. Her parents heard her small, clear voice drift down the stairs. She wasn't crying or screaming. Her tone was one of simple, innocent curiosity. She asked a question into the empty darkness. "Who are you?" For a moment, there was nothing, just the frantic beating of her parents' hearts as they stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. And then, a voice answered. It wasn't the whisper they'd heard before, nor was it the chilling laughter. This voice was calm, clear, and feminine. It spoke just 3 words, but those 3 words shattered the family's last shred of hope. The voice replied, "I belong here." That was it. That was the end. There was no discussion, no debate. The calm, possessive certainty in that voice was more terrifying than any scream or violent act. "I belong here." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. This entity wasn't just a visitor. It wasn't a lost soul passing through. It believed this land, this house, was its own. It outweighted as the writing on the window had promised, and now it was home. The family knew they could not win. They were intruders in their own house. By the first light of morning, they didn't pack. They didn't call movers. They left everything behind: the furniture they had saved for, the clothes in their closets, the children's toys scattered on the floor. They walked away from their home, their dream, and never looked back. They fled with only their lives and the horrifying memory of that voice. The story goes that they left everything behind except for one thing: the deed to the land. They couldn't sell it. Who would they sell it to? How could they, in good conscience, pass that curse on to another unsuspecting family? So the land set, the house slowly surrendering to the elements. A silent monument to a promise kept. The land still remembers her. The locals say that if you're brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to walk that property on a quiet night, you can still feel it. A cold spot that won't go away. The feeling of being watched from the trees. And sometimes, if you listen very, very closely, you might just hear the faint echo of a woman's laughter carried on the wind. The Bell Witch legend didn't end in 1821. It just went dormant, waiting for the right time to remind everyone that some stories are more than just stories. They are promises, etched into the very soil, waiting for someone to come home. Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into the chilling postscript of the Bell Witch legend. What do you think? Do you believe the spirit returned? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring the darker corners of history and folklore, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. Stay safe, and see you in the next video.